Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья!
Dear friends, our online conference, which is titled City for Everyone, Health Sustainability, continues to work. We are in the Sustainable City track, and today we're going to have a section by the keynote speaker, Vancouverism, from New Urbanism to Sustainable City. Larry Beasley is the former co-director of city planning in Vancouvering. He is a co-author of 2 books and author of a book, Vancouverism. What is Vancouverism? Why do we have this new term on the basis of the name of the city? What are the achievements of the city in sustainable development? You can mention what were you doing in Vancouver and what are you dreaming about in the future?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you, at least virtually, for this year's Moscow Urban Forum to really offer my city of Vancouver in Canada as one interesting example of a pervasive reinvention toward becoming a sustainable city. Now, you've already heard a bit about Vancouver during the conference, but now I want to give you the whole picture, both the achievements and the shortfalls. You know, I'm a good person to tell the story, as you've already heard, because I was at the center of the action for many years, leading much of the change as the city's chief planner. And I've also worked in Moscow, so I understand the issues that you're facing in your community as well. Now, I want to take a moment and pull up the PowerPoint. If you'll just will hesitate just for a moment here. There we go. As you see, I call this presentation From Past Malaise to a Sustainable Future. So today, I want to describe what my city used to be like, what our change agenda has included, what problems that we're still tackling, and a little bit about our processes. And as a preamble, I want to start by really sketching what you might call our urban vision. Now, I've written about all of this, as you've heard already, in 2 books. Here they are. And I offer them really as a good reference if you want to go a little deeper into these topics. Well, where did this all start? Right up through the mid-1980s, Vancouver was a very typical North American city, but then it started to experience deep problems, difficult problems. From the 1880s on, our economy had been resource-based, lumber, mining, fishing, but that was starting to globalize, and that really gutted our traditional economic engine. So by the 1980s, with over 2 million people in our region, we were in quite a deep malaise. Like other North American cities, a flight to the suburbs had begun. It was hitting our downtown quite hard. Our older neighborhoods were starting to collapse. And the new neighborhoods, as they came on, were very auto-oriented, car-centric, and gulping of energy and resources. While the word was not yet fashionable, the fact is that our city was profoundly unsustainable, and actually it wasn't very exciting or memorable either. Now, fortunately, we had a few things going for us, our magnificent natural setting, mountains and water. In the early 1970s, we were the only city in North America to say absolutely no to freeways. We also happened to be a place of mostly new immigrants with fresh ideas. So there weren't many of those social barriers that other cities have. And in 1986, we came to the attention of the world by hosting Expo 86. We decided to go for the new economy. We decided, frankly, that we had to live off our wits and our good looks. And to do that, we had to reimagine our city from the beginning, which really set off everything that was to follow. And from this low point, we started to invent a new dream. It's now called in many places Vancouverism. So what is this dream all about? Well, honestly, our first interest was a really obvious one. It was simply to regenerate urban livability, building a contemporary appeal, attraction, a new economic draw. And then later, as sustainability became more understood, this increasingly diversified the agenda, adding environmental and social responsibility. And then more recently, and I think urgently highlighted over the past year, resilience was included, addressing survival against the unexpected and finding opportunity in adversity. So parallel with thinking that was starting to come together all over the world, these three prime themes ultimately coalesced into what we now refer to as our smart growth formula for the kind of city that we really wanted to become. Here is that formula just summarized. It covers both the structure and the infrastructure of cities. From a structural point of view, it's about the form of our cities' new housing forms. It is about the mix, a very intensive mix. It is about green construction, the fabric of the city, and it is about the character of the places in the city. From an infrastructure point of view, it is about the circulation within our cities in different ways, the community and cultural facilities and services, and of course, how we handle utilities in a passive context. Well, the hard work that was driven by this framework has shaped a transformation of really epic proportions in Vancouver, especially in our inner city. We call the whole thing our living first strategy, because we believe really firmly that with new people coming in, we would then get all the rest we needed to make a very lively city. And that's been working out for us. We moved from about 40,000 people living downtown in the early 1980s to over 120,000 people today, with even more on the way. And then we started to be acknowledged in the world's ratings as a very livable city. So let me summarize the basic features of Vancouverism, what this is really all about. First, we arranged new development into identifiable and functional neighborhood units, a real local focus, with the right array of amenities, a very nice retail base, and with lots of local character. Here are the typical neighborhood amenities that we have as absolute requirements. And here is the general scale and the commercial retail infrastructure that we also target. And in recent years, you will all know, this has become known as the idea of the 15-minute neighborhood. We also then made parks and open space a vital presence, adding over 30 hectares of new parks in our core city, including dedicating the entire water's edge for the public. And then we diversified open space, not just parks, but also lovely gardens and private courtyards and green roofs everywhere. And this respite of parks really allows density to be more tolerable. And of course, we all know that a good parks network supports natural ecologies as well. We felt that a genuine social diversity was essential, so we set special housing targets and housing guidelines for the less advantaged and for families. And I think the story of families in our city is particularly exciting. We have well surpassed our initial target of 25% of multiple housing to be suitable for families with children, probably the best performance in North America. You know, in Vancouver now, kids are everywhere, and I think we all know that that makes the city much more civilized. Housing was also secured for low-income people to the tune of 20% of all households, reflecting a regional average. And then by mixing everything up, we were able to get homes and workplaces and key service destinations much closer together. And then with this simple advantage of proximity, we could pursue a very different transportation agenda, much less dependent on the car. We did a big push with the senior governments to invest in transit expansion, and from buses, we added ferries, we also added rapid transit, and then we reinforced that locally with massive investments in cycling and also in walking. And then we coupled that with very aggressive traffic calming. We did cutbacks on parking requirements. We added a car share system. We narrowed our newer streets as we designed them. We reclaimed auto infrastructure wherever we could for other purposes, and we started limiting auto access into the inner city. Now, this was not an anti-car strategy, but we did want a much better modal balance and a lot less auto impacts. And the inner city results are quite heartening, a significant drop in car ownership and use, less cars commuting in and out, and now almost 70% of trips in the core are done by non-motorized modes. Of course, that's mostly people walking. Now, inherent in this strategy has been an unashamed desire for more density, more scale, mixed use, coupled with a very careful attention to domesticity and to neighborliness. So we put a lot of attention to specific urban design. Vancouver's inner city form is no accident. Building massing and open space are shaped across whole areas in coherent plans with public views protected, with careful management of sun and shadows, with lavish street tree planting, and with lots of public art. We invented a new tower and podium building typology with townhouses at the sidewalk, with very thin tower profiles, wide separations of our towers, and then a scaling down, a moderation of scale to the sidewalk. And then we added a lovely mid-rise tower option, building option as well. And the whole idea has been to convert people's previously negative attitudes about dense living. People helped us understand that density really must be tamed and that quality must be assured if you wanted people to buy in. Because in the end, it's all about consumer choices. Everything is really driven by the shaping of consumer preferences. And finally, as you've already heard from the current city manager, Sadhu Johnson, we have increasingly been drawing on the green requirements for a much more organic sustainability. Vancouver now has a comprehensive green initiative targeted to 2050. I'm not going to go into the details because Sadhu has already done that, but this includes pushing the boundaries on our progressive urban patterns for buildings and transportation, but it also includes adding now higher targets for alternative energy, for water conservation, waste management, green construction, and even urban agriculture. And again, we've started to see results as you see our placement in the rankings here. And our Athletes Village for the 2010 Olympic Games has really become a North American green exemplar. Well, as you might imagine, there have definitely been some surprises. There have been some spin-off problems that we might not have expected along the way. To begin with, this was a very urban story, not yet really spread out to the suburbs. So the community and transportation benefits are not yet totally pervasive. That's going to be the real mission of the next generation. But the biggest challenges really had to do with the social side. So I want to really offer these as a warning. The first thing is that all that frenzied new development has had the effect to destabilize our most marginal community nearby, particularly hitting vulnerable people. So beware of land speculation and gentrification, and ignoring the endemic social problems on the street, such as substance abuse and mental illness and poverty. Vancouver's continued stress on this leaves one very clear and simple message: an aggressive social development strategy is absolutely vital from the start. Second, the real estate spiral up has exacerbated affordability problems. Protecting housing security is now Vancouver's single greatest challenge that may actually jeopardize some of the other advances that we've made. Even with the low-income targets, we've not invested enough in social housing, so homelessness is still with us, and waiting lists for that social housing remain quite long. But now, middle-income pressures are also soaring, and they're proving even harder to solve. The Vancouver warning is that a coherent strategy for wide housing affordability also has to be built in right from the beginning. So those are some of the continuing challenge. Now, I don't have enough time to go very deeply into the ways and means of achieving Vancouverism, but let me close with just a few hints about this. In addition to being a very deliberately planned city, as you've already heard, our regulatory framework is highly discretionary, which means that we can easily entertain very innovative new ideas. It's also very, very transactional. We work together, we negotiate to find the best solutions. It uses incentives to reward good performance. It leverages enough wealth out of densification to really fund a huge program of civic amenities. Almost none of the transformation has hit the current taxpayer. Its other special features, particularly about process, are maybe best summarized by what we call an overarching ethic for how we managed our transformation. Here it is, in a nutshell. It is about public engagement, building partnerships, insisting on explicit design, tapping into the newest technologies, shaping everything through a lens of equity, and never sacrificing our identity for anything else that might be happening. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the story of Vancouverism, the makeover in just over 30 years of a previously quite forgettable post-war city into hopefully an unforgettable indicator of future urban possibilities. The advances have been amazing. The setbacks have been, yes, tough to face from time to time, but the overall change has been well worth the effort. We sit much more lightly in our natural setting, and we enjoy wide public support. And that's a very good thing towards real sustainability moving forward. I thank you very much. I think I'm going to bring myself back on screen now, and we'll have time for a discussion.
Thank you very much, Larry. Thanks a lot for your presentation and for your talk. Have you talked us about the transformations of Vancouver for the last decades. And thanks for what you told us about some problems and challenges. This is a very precious experience to know not only about successes, but also shortfalls and problems and challenges which have become even more relevant in the course of transformation. I have a few questions to you. And on top of that, we are, of course, happy to accept questions from our audience. And I hope I will be able to ask all your questions to you. We will have a very interesting discussions. Closer to the final part of your presentation, you mentioned that the most part of your transformation projects, which have been realized in Vancouver, were not put on the taxpayers' shoulders. So what was the funding? Where did you get the money then?
Well, what happens is as you intensify the city, the land becomes much more valuable. That is to say, you buy land which is either not developed or at a very low scale, and as you allow more development, that land becomes more valuable. So what we in the government did is that we took part of that value back to the public commonwealth, rather than leaving all of that just with the developer. The developer gets part of that profit, and the city gets part of that profit. And then the city uses all of that money to invest in the new social and community infrastructure that is needed. The developer likes this because they need that infrastructure too, because otherwise their consumers don't have all they need and the products are not so attractive. And then of course it works for the people because they get all the new amenities they need, but we don't ask those existing taxpayers to subsidize the new people coming in. It's a very, very intelligent formula to share the wealth. There is great wealth that comes into a city as a part of its intensification and its diversification. In most places, all of that wealth goes to just a few developers. Sometimes it's hundreds and hundreds of percent of increase in land value. What we do is we take a piece of that wealth. We say development is really a privilege. It's not just a right. And part of that privilege is a responsibility to invest in the community infrastructure. Otherwise, our citizens would vote us out of office and we would have never seen any of this change that I've talked about.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting model. Yes, I agree. My next question is related directly to your answer, and this is the following. How did you manage in this case to build the balance? On one hand, developers, of course, have some interests to build very closely, densely, very high, without leaving so much space, maybe for some public functions. But you mentioned even such factors like the view, beautiful view to the mountains, to the sky, to the ocean, whatever. How did you manage to persuade developers to play by those rules, and on the other hand, to keep the balance between the density of view, quality of life, comfort, and efficient use of resources? Have you thought about it?
Oh, yes, we thought a lot about it. The trouble is, in most cities, change just happens by accident. And so a developer looks at a development and says, okay, I want to do the maximum amount I can do. That's fine. In our city, we said no. We have a framework, a concept for our city. If you want to develop here, and we knew there was a lot of pent-up demand, so they did want to develop here, then we said you have to participate in the investment in the community infrastructure as well. Secondly, we said if we work together, we can deliver a much better city, which means that it will be supported by citizens, so the developer would not be the enemy, as they often are in cities, and people would be able to get the kind of amenities they needed, which would make the product of those developers more appealing. So it would be of higher value. So what we did is that, unlike many planners in North America, instead of trying to push density down, we wanted to let the developer get as much as they could. But then we said, in order to make that viable and livable, you have to add all the amenities you could think of. So we would sit in the room at City Hall and we would say, what else is needed to make a great, livable, lovely city that would meet and fulfill our citizens, that our citizens could actually fall in love with? And that also increased demand. That made more demand, which a developer cannot work, as you know, unless there is good demand. So we helped the developer build demand, and the developer invested and helped us build a lovely city. And it was a very nice quid pro quo that works to this very day.
Thank you very much for your explanation how the scheme worked, how you tried to find the balance and work with all stakeholders, with all the parties. My next question comes from your statement, which you've also mentioned in your lecture. So you tried not to set too many limitations, not serious bans on cars, but just softer work with car owners sometimes. But of course, obviously, still you had to impose some limitations and bans. how you managed to persuade, to convince people of that those bans are really needed, and what reactions, what feedback did you get?
Well, the most fundamental thing that we did was we never started from our idea. We always went to the people first. We had very intensive public engagement. Public engagement goes on here. Tens of thousands of people are involved every day. I'm on our transit board here in Vancouver, and we are looking at new ideas in transportation. We've already talked to over 100,000 people. So the ideas that we bring forward are not seen as, top-down requirements. They're seen as what the community wants. And when people know that, they will start to think about that side of things and be, I would say, more cooperative. Then we also did not do dramatic change at any one time. We very slowly and organically and carefully insinuated the new ideas. We did pilot projects. We did tests. We would do one area. Our bicycle system, for example, which 15 years ago there was no bicycle system. Slowly, we've insinuated it carefully and gently, working with local people into the neighborhood. So now it's becoming a great system, and people get used to it. It takes time for people to come to grips and get used to things and begin to realize the great benefits that they offer. And so slowly it changes. Now, we're not there yet. We still have almost half of the trips, well, over half of the trips in our bigger region that are done by the car. But that is slowly changing. We're putting in a very hefty infrastructure of rapid transit. People like it. They move to it. It's cheaper. We've added a lot of the active mobilities, and we've started to bring things together. So it's just natural that you would move from mobility in the car to walking and cycling and other rolling devices, as they say. So it's a way of working with people. The community is not something we invent at City Hall. The community is invented by the community, with the community, over many, many years of creative thinking.
Thank you very much, Larry, for your answer. What do you think? This transformation experience in Vancouver, has it already become a role model for other cities of the North America or other cities in the world? What do you think?
I have two answers. One answer is yes, I think it has been. That concept has now been gelled into something called Vancouverism. I go around the world working with cities to try to insinuate some of these ideas. But having said that, every city has to be unique. It has to be done its own way. It has to be done within its own culture, has to have its own traditions and history. The worst thing that could happen is that Vancouver gets exported to the Middle East or some other part of the world. The principles do, I think, stay the same, but the way that they are operationalized, acted out, designed, built, has to be different. We have to differentiate our cities. We have to give our cities more identity if we want them to be fulfilling for our citizens, and if we want them to be grounded in the traditions that people, from which people generate their love, their affection, and their investment in the city. So yes, I hope it's a model. I do. I hope we can offer it as an idea to the world, but no, we don't want to export it. We want to stay the way we are. We want people to use the same principles, but maybe do something better somewhere else in the world.
Thank you very much, Larry. I believe this is a very important thought that I wanted to repeat, that you are not willing to pack Vancouverism and sell it in all other cities of the world or repack it somehow under your Vancouverism. You just demonstrate what you managed, what you failed, and tell other cities that they should look at their resources, their challenges and limitations, and do something on their own. I really like this approach. Thank you very much. And my final question, the question which we received from the audience, is the following. Could you please cite specific examples how changes of city design or city planning changes would bring new practices of sustainable behavior of people, of citizens? How can we plan something differently and in this way attract and get different reactions, day-to-day habits of people, what they still do or stop doing?
I really like this question because our practice of urbanism in Vancouver really had a breakthrough when we realized that we had to understand people not as citizens voting on things, but as consumers making purchases and selections and choices all the time. And so what we do is that we tap into those consumers and we say to ourselves, what would we have to do to make the right sustainable choice also the very spontaneous preferred choice of a consumer who knows nothing about planning, nothing about any of these principles, but only is living his or her life on a day-to-day basis. So take the issue of densification. You know, most people in North America hate really dense cities. They don't like the height, they don't like all that. But when you add all the amenities, the parks, the childcare, the community facilities, when you include families with children, when you include all different incomes together, when the experience becomes exciting and interesting, well, then it works for the average consumer. They want it, they want more of it, and it is also a much more sustainable way of doing things. Take the issue of active mobility. We know the very best solution to our problems of congestion and pollution would be that most people make most of their trips by walking. We know that. Well, our cities are not designed for that. They're designed in ways that people have to get in cars, they have to get on transit to move around. So by redesigning our cities to be much more sustainable, well, it's just a natural thing that you walk. You don't have to know it's a sustainable thing. You don't have to know it's a good thing. You just feel it's the right thing for you and your family. So every single dimension of sustainability has to be not only thought about from a scientific point of view of how it helps us to become responsible with our environment and with one another, but also it has to be thought about how can you make it appealing. I often say, how can you make it delicious? And when those two things come together, then spontaneously people will do the right thing, not because they have been told it's right, some government said to them, but because it is simply better, easier, more convenient for them. Every single thing can be dealt with in that way. Unfortunately, we've been so focused on the science of sustainability, we've forgotten about how to bring it to the public and make it appealing.
Thank you very much, Larry. Many thanks for your presentation, for your answers to all of our questions and to questions from the audience. Of course, it was a very open and sincere and I believe very fair discussion when you told us about your successes and failures and specific transformation stories or a newborn of the city of Vancouver. And I have to admit, I've never been to Vancouver, but after your lecture, I really want to come to visit your city. When you told in the last question, it's delicious city, and we can really feel it from your talk, from your stories of its transformation. We very often speak a lot about theory, about sustainable development, resilience, low carbon development, but a practical talk about specific practices. Sometimes, for example, about your unique system of work and building up partnership with developers, which is really interesting. And of course, it can be very useful for other cities, probably in different forms, but the principle is really important. The whole principle of listening to opinion of people, of feedback from local communities. What do they need? What is interesting for them? That's very interesting. And I also feel I liked very much your fact that what is important to have the beautiful view to the city, to the mountains, to the ocean, to some other natural landscapes. Whatever dense we build of skyscrapers, people always like to have a good view, think about something great, and have some dreams. Thank you very much that you shared your dreams, you shared your visions, your reality, and you shared your practice. Many thanks for that, and have a nice day. We send you the sunniest greetings from evening Moscow to your morning in Vancouver. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you will come to Vancouver. The more we're together, the more the world's a better place. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you.